Peace, 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 peace. Greetings. Happy Holy Friday. Welcome back again, all light seekers, all listeners, to our Friday BBT Book Club. I'm your host tonight again, Noble Moso L. And I'm a Mufti and minister of the Burning Bush Tabernacle, Science Temple and School. We are a nonprofit, so we accept donations. We appreciate any donation anybody would like for any of the literature, books, plethora of documents we have, physical copy and PDF. We welcome you to check us out at mypdfbooks.com. That's books with a Z, and bindedbooks.com. Again, if you want any books that we'll be speaking of in this book club series, you need to get a copy of these books so you can keep up with readings, studies, questions, concerns, source material. All these books have a plethora of source material that leads you to other books that we do have as well. Again, mypdfbooks.com. Also sponsored by Mayat Sons. Check us out on Instagram and our website, Herbs of Mayat. Books as well on healing, herbal remedies, the body, healing the mind, and so much more. Also sponsored by Morsachi, Moorish regalia and drip, influenced by the Moorish Renaissance and the Russian icons. And also get regalia, kufis, fez, turbans, tunics at moorishhaberdasher.com. If you're looking at any web development, website creation, AI, it's 3 packages. Check out ALO Design Pros. Design your online business strategy. And if you've been with us earlier, you know we went through the Moorish Paradigm, Volume 1. And this is Volume 2 of the Moorish Paradigm by Hakeem Bey, also known as Peter Lamborn Wilson. And this book goes by the name of Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. Again, truth is stranger than fiction. And this book is in reference to a lot of unknown or unspoken history of the blacks, or the so-called Negro, being the true native and having bloodlines of native indigenous people. As you can see on the cover of this book, it's an eye in an open sky. It's not surrounded by anything. It's not closed in. All these symbols and signs have sacred meanings to many people and layers. Just to read some of the preface. The Journal of the Moorish Paradigm is a journal dedicated to Moorish science, history, and civilization. The goal is the formation and documentation of a Moorish paradigm or worldview. The Journal of the Moorish Paradigm is also designed to chronicle the evolution of the Moorish paradigm. In this ongoing journal, we intend to introduce you to knowledge and information from a perspective that you will find nowhere else. One day, while coming home from Bear Mountain in New York, the ancestors led me to a book called The Ramampo, Mountain People, by David Stephen Cohen. The book is about a group of our people, Aboriginal Moors, inhabiting the Ramampo Mountains in New York, not far from Tapanzi Tapanzi Bridge. The Rampo are an example of our people who did not integrate into so-called white society. Again, the Ramampo are an example of our people who did not integrate into so-called white society, but who went into relatively inaccessible regions such as mountains in order to stay outside of white society. But who went into relatively inaccessible regions such as mountains in order to stay outside of the white society in which they seen their people enslaved and ill-treated. The Ramampo claim descendant from the Tuscarora Indians, who are a branch of the Cherokee from North Carolina. European societies classified these people as Negroes, colored, and or mulatto. They say that they are Aboriginal Native American, not brought here from anywhere else. Some now classify them as triracial isolates because they are said to be a mixture of the so-called black, red, and white. In reality, these people are the descendants of our people, Aboriginal Moors, with latter admixtures of Mongol types, so-called Red Indian, whom some Moors call the Shimonites, who came from Asia, and then later some admixture of Europeans who preferred our society to their own. The author of the book, Ramampo, Mountain People, David Cohen says, in the eastern United States, there are more than 200 isolated, racially mixed groups, between 75,000 and 100,000 people, who claim Indian ancestry but maintain no tribal affiliations. Though it obvious that these are our people, they outright reject the classification of Negro and Black. All these groups in the eastern United States feel the same way. This is because, in the past, they've seen what happened to their brothers and sisters who classified themselves as Negro and Black. The proper status conferred to them, as in the case of Dred Scott. And I challenge you all to go Google and read the Dred Scott case. It's one of the most famous and significant court cases in the history of America. Their response to the slave label of Negro and Black, almost exactly the same as the Moors today, only they lack the knowledge that Nobuju Ali brought us regarding our Moorish descendant and history. They do know for sure that they are Aboriginal and were not brought here from Africa in slave ships. Here is another young Tuscarora sister from the Ramampo Mountains. Vince Morgan from Mahawa insists that the old timers used to say that they were descendants from the Tuscarora Indians. The author, David Cohen, says that they are not descendants from the Tuscarora because, based on his genealogical research, he concluded that they were descendants of free blacks. But this again is the Europeans' classification of us, and the lie perpetuated that you cannot look like us and be Aboriginal at the same time. Another example of this is in Robertson County, North Carolina, where in 1830, the majority of the population listed as free blacks consisted of people who considered themselves Indian. Again, this was in Robertson County, North Carolina, where in the 1830s, the majority of the population listed as free blacks consisted of people who considered themselves Indian. This Aboriginal elder from the Ramampo region is a folk artist named Ed Morgan. In 1889, James Mooney and an anthropologist working for the Smithsonian Institute did research on Indian culture and survivors. And he came to the conclusion that there was undoubtedly considerable Indian ancestry among blacks in the southern coastal plain region. Regarding the powerful Powhatan Confederacy, the Chickahominy, the Mattapony, the Nansemond, the Nottoway, the Pamunkey, Potomac, the Rappahannock, who held this dominion in the region around Virginia. Thomas Jefferson in 1785 is recording as saying that the Mamponis have more Negro than Indian in their blood. This is a play on words because what he refers to as Negro and Indian is one and the same people, only victims of divide and conquer strategy. This color-based white society caused many psychological problems among our people. In a book called Personality in a White Indian Negro Community, American Sociology Review, Volume 4, Guy B. Johnson says that the Croatian and Lumbees of Robertson County, North Carolina, had problems of personal adjustment, such as coming to terms with Negroid features in the color-based white society. So these people are all up the eastern seaboard, Virginia, Delaware, Maryland. It continues talking about the Nanticoke and more folk medicines. This is the Delawares, the Shawnee, the Seneca, the Mohican, and other Eastern Indians claim that their forebears originally received their knowledge from Matapasiku, from a tribe, the Nanticoke. So this is just really showing that these tribes were linked and paid homage to their indigenous ancestors and their bloodlines. In the essay Nanticoke and Moors Folk Medicine, C.A. Westlanger, he speaks about the Aboriginals who called themselves Moors and Nanticokes. The Delawares, Shawnee, Seneca, Mahika, and other Eastern Indians claim that their forebears originally received their knowledge from a tribe called the Nanticoke. He goes on to say, regarding a community of Aboriginals in Kent County, Delaware, that locally these people are called Moors. And he further says investigations among the Delaware Moors, starting in the fall of 1941, led me to to conclude that the ancestry of many of the families included both Delaware and Nanticoke Indians. These people also were classified as Negro on the books of the Europeans. And Westlanger documents the struggles of these people against that designation. This is a clay figurine at a Hopewell mound builder, of a Hopewell mound builder, woman from the Turner Pyramid and Mound Complex near Cincinnati, Ohio. James Hugo Johnson, in the book Journal of Negro History, Volume 14, concluded based on his research that the Indian has not disappeared from the land, but is now part of the Negro population of the United States. This is a very significant statement. All of the so-called millions of Aboriginals that were said to have been wiped out were not all wiped out, but are in fact us. And this is definitely where we all have to do our family research, study our bloodlines, study our family last names, our family crest, because we all should be understanding our bloodlines and our families. So it's no discrepancies. So we're not just all going along with one story, because everyone's family story is unique. The Moors, or so-called Indians, on the eastern seaboard of the United States were a maritime people, and were the same Moors found on the other side of the Atlantic, on the coast from Southwest Africa all the way to England, Ireland, Scotland, Denmark, etc. In fact, the people called the Danes and the Vikings were originally Moorish navigators. And this is quoted to a researcher and scholar, David McRitchie, in his book that we offer as well, called Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1. It seems like the Creek men or pirates were chiefly of the race of Cimbri, or the Black Danes, and Maori, or Blackamoors. He also says on the same page, they are better known in modern history under the general designation of Vic Kings, his spelling the same as Viking in meaning, or Creek men. The white Europeans found among the Vikings were the white serfs and peasants that David McRitchie said that the Danes and Vikings were terrorizing and kidnapping. These Moors or Danes also made them pay a tribute called the Danegeld, from which was later derived the term blackmail. On page 309, he says, they are presented to us as piratical Vikings, or Creek men, fit descendants of those black heathens that murdered, robbed, and burned all along our shores as far back as the 9th century. So you can clearly see where the pirate theme can come from. Some of these tribes were more vicious than others. And here we have a Moorish brazier found among the remnants of the Vikings. This maritime people called Danes, Vikings or Vic Kings, and blackamoors are same Moors found along the rivers and creeks on the eastern coast of the United States and called Indians. And this goes along with more science, understanding we are from all the four corners of this nation, of this planet. You can go across seas and see brothers that look just like you, just like your mother, just like your sisters. So this is without any doubt or contradiction. So these are the remnants of that ancient Atlantean empire. Remnants of the ancient Atlantean empire, Atlantis. The dominions of a Mexim that spanned the Atlantic and dominated the land on both sides. We are the direct descendants of these Moors David McRitchie speaks of, or the Moors or Indians in Britain as being the same in appearance and culture as the ones here in this hemisphere, excuse me. This is what accounts for all you hear coming from the Europeans now about the Vikings and Norse discovering America. Well, I got news for them. Those so-called Vikings you talk about were originally Moors. This Moorish paradigm is like Moses's rod. It is definitely swallowing up all other paradigms. So as it's saying, even the Vikings, even the Danes, and brothers from the most northern hemisphere of this world started off as Moorish, melanated people. The Europeans were used by the so-called Danish and Vikings and Viking Moors as peasant serfs to work the feudal estates of the noble class of Moors, who were also known as cavaliers. The European women were sold largely as concubines to fill the harems of rich and noble Moors. This is not something that the Moors should be proud of. It is this which ultimately led to the enslavement of the Moors by their former slaves and serfs. What goes around comes around. And more we need to study more about the Islamic slave trade, because that's what they cover a lot of that history of Arabs. But we know the original Arab was melanated black or a blackamoor. This is a picture of a Moorish Normand knight and his European concubine wife. When the Europeans began to free themselves and overcome the Moors who were oppressing them in Europe, they began to colonize the lands owned by the Moors in Europe, as well as the eastern seaboard of the United States. David McRitchie says on page 229 to 230 of Ancient and Modern Britons. If you'd like a copy of that book, Ancient and Modern Britons, you can get it at mypdfbooks.com or physical copy through bindedbooks.com. Go to mypdfbooks.com if you would like a copy of Ancient and Modern Britons, a must-have book. And as I said, this image is of a Moor and his European concubine. But eventually the children of that Moor would do the bidding of his mother, and they would turn on their fathers and their uncles, because they began to run to the gods of Europe, run to the women of Europe, and that weakened the Moors from within. It says the country of the Moors, or Moray men of the north, was colonized by the Norman Dutch people under the supervision of David I and his grandson, Malcolm IV. The native Moors or Indians, who may have been of early Pictish, like Pictish, or Danish stock, were first overcome after many severe conflicts. When this was finally accomplished, Malcolm IV removed them all from the land of their birth and scattered them through other districts of Scotland, both beyond the hills and on other sides thereof, so that not even a native of that land abode there. And he installed therein his own peaceful people. This was around the middle late 1500s. MacRitchie then notes, this plantation of Moray, as it was called, was distinctly a feudal prototype of the plantation of Virginia. Thus, the white people who were enslaved and terrorized by the Moors in Europe freed themselves under the Catholic Church by mixing and allying themselves with other Moors. They then overcame the Moors who oppressed them and took their lands and put them on reservations or outright exterminated them. This colonization technique was perfected first in Europe and then duplicated on the eastern seaboard of the United States under the auspices and guidance of none other than Sir Francis Bacon, who we will talk about in a minute. And this is a Moorish coat of arms. You can see the woman, the Moorish woman on top, the crown. This would be a coat of arms. Another quote from Ancient and Modern Britons, a book you can get from mypdfbooks.com or bindedbooks.com, physical copy. The Englishmen who had colonized the western shores of the Atlantic, not more than a generation or two before Gross, spoke of Indians there being as black as gypsies. In 1676, the native races of New England were spoken of indifferently as Indians and Moors, and our British Indians are also remembered as Moors. He continues by telling us that large companies of Moors or black people roamed up and down the country rather more than 100 years ago, taking very considerable contribution from the farming classes and others, besides being possessed of many fierce and aggressive qualities. Thus, it is seen that the Moors were also known as the Danes and Vikings. 2. That they enslaved and exacted tribute from the European peasants and serf farmers, called the Dangeld or blackmail, the tribute of the Black Army. That these Moors were on both sides of the Atlantic, and that the term Moor and Indian were interchangeably applied to them. That they were a maritime, seafaring nation of people. Moor means navigator. That the Europeans rose up, assisted by other Moors, took the Moorish lands and enslaved them, exterminated them, and or put them on reservations. These Moors, also known as Danes, Vikings or Vikings, the Picts, Picts, were regularly traveling back and forth across the Atlantic and are the descendants of the ancient Atlanteans, who were also known as Phoenicians, Canaanites, Egyptians, etc. To the left is a picture of an ancient Phoenician navigator with black skin and a fez on his head. This is just like the Maori tribe. You see those big statues with those red feathers on their head. It's no mistaking the global nature of this seafaring culture. This is why they were also known as pirates. Another independent source showing that the so-called Indians on the eastern seaboard, Newfoundland, or Terra Nova were Moors comes from another book recommended by Brother Shamala, called Africans and Native Americans by Jack D. Forbes. Forbes shows in the book how many so-called Native Americans, Indians, were sold into slavery in Africa and Europe, the exact opposite direction of what we were taught the slave trade went. These Native Americans or Indians were classified as Negroes and blacks and Moors in the slaves' books of Seville, Spain, and elsewhere. On page 29, it says, slaves from Terra Nova show up in the slave markets of Seville and Valencia very soon after the 1500s. For example, in Valencia, during the period to 1516, we find in 1503 Miguel Manuel, in 1505 Juan and Pedro, in 1507 Antonio and Juan Marco, in 1515 Ali, now Melancor, in 1516 Catalina. They were all classified as negros. And this is the image of the book, Africans and Native Americans, the language of race and the evolution of red black peoples. And you have these books just for a small donation. Bindedbooks.com, mypdfbooks.com. You definitely want to get these books. Send the email and get your copy. Now it says, if we were first brought to North America around 1619, or even 1555 for that matter, and how were they taking slaves from Newfoundland to Europe? Keep in mind that one of the Native Americans even had the name Ali and were classified as Negro once they reached Valencia. When the Moors were expelled from Spain and Portugal, some went to North Africa and many came to the eastern seaboard of the United States. And we know they show us this picture a lot when they try to tell us of the mass numbers of people that came over here. And I'm not saying that our people didn't get over here in ships, but the number of people they're saying could fit on a ship like this would not arrive to any land healthy enough to do any type of physical labor. So we need to reevaluate all these ships and not just go off sketches. And it says, was the slave trade from Africa to America a hoax designed to enslave free Moors under the Fugitive Slave Laws, or the Fugitive Slave Law Acts, and in direct violation of the dozens or so treaties signed with Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, all Northwest African nations that could claim us. Like when they say Africans that came back to get us, these is the ones, the North Africans who are not taking the Negro brand. Africans and Native Americans, Forbes says, in any case, at least 3,000 Americans, so-called Indians, are known to have been shipped to Europe between 1493 and 1501, with the likely total being possibly double that, so 6,000. Most were sent to the Seville area, where they seemed to show up in the slave markets as Negroes. These are major contradictions to the whole slave trade story. We were already here in the Americas prior to the so-called slave trade. The missing Indians are us. The slave the slaves sold on the slave markets in the South were initially our people from right here in this hemisphere. As they took our lands here, they enslaved the inhabitants of those lands who were our people. And on page 25, he says, the tens of millions of Americans, so-called Indians, who disappeared after 1492 did not all die in the Holocaust inflicted within the America. Many thousands were sent to Europe and Africa as slaves, where their descendants still live. Before moving on to the next subject matter, I have 4 more pieces of information I would like to share with the readers regarding our Aboriginal heritage. This first piece is an article of Renee Nuremberg, sent to me by Brother Bay Ricardo Williamson Bay of Philadelphia. And it deals with reference to the chronicles of the Chinese about their travels in the United States over 1,000 years ago. It refers to the Moors in the Midwest wearing sashes and fezzes. The natives are entirely black. They talk about the scorched pygmy people, about men who use wooden arrows with iron points, and the mountain of the Eastern Pass, with the country of refined gentlemen. These people, the record relates, having clothing, caps, sashes, and swords. They have tigers and panthers, which are gentle and tame. They eat millet and wildebeest, and have numerous variety of birds. The next article comes from a book entitled The Secret Archives of the Vatican by Maria Ambrosini. On page 154, there's a reference to a document that was in the secret archives of the Vatican, describing a voyage by the Queen of Sheba across the Atlantic to America. In a later issue, we will show and prove how the Queen of Sheba is really Queen Hatshepsut, and this journey to America is Queen Hatshepsut's journey to the land of the gods, Punt, which is really Punic, or Punic, or Phoenicia, Phoenician America. The article says that the Queen of Sheba had sailed out of the Mediterranean into the Atlantic, and there, 95 degrees to the westward, by an easy passage, due to westwardly currents from Africa to America, she had found a land called Sipanzo, which Paisan took to be Japan, fertile and abundant, and whose extent surpassed Africa and Europe. Sounds like Plato's description of Atlantis. And this next article comes from Leo Weiner, Africa and the Discovery of America. It says on November 2nd, Columbus decided to send Rodrigo Exeres and Luis de Torres, who had lived with the Aldentado of Mercasia, and was a Jew and known Hebrew and Chaldaic and knew Hebrew and Chaldaic and some Arabic, to see the king of Cuba in order to present the letter and find out all that was necessary. Naturally, a man who knew Arabic and another who knew the language of Guinea, as we have heard before, were especially adapted to hold conversation with the kings of the West Indies. When Columbus wanted to address the king of the West Indies, he sent interpreters who spoke Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldean because they were Moors. It is also said that the name Cuba comes from the word Cuba Nakan, which in turn derives from the word Sipango on their maps. Sipango is the same as Sin Paso mentioned in the previous article regarding the document about Queen of Sheba sailing to America. This shows that the previous Vatican document was in possession of Columbus. Thus, he was not really lost. Perhaps he called the people Indians because at that time India was called Eastern Ethiopia, and Queen of Sheba, or Hatshepsut, was an Ethiopian or Egyptian queen who had ruled as a pharaoh. So again, there's so much history in the Americas once you open up to this paradigm and embrace that our people are indigenous to the Americas. Some of our ancestors were not enslaved. Some of the term Negro and slave was labeled on all people free on the indigenous America in the 1800s, 1700s, up until today. So again, I welcome you to get this book from us. You see my email down here. You can email me directly at maatsons@gmail.com, and visit Herbs of Mayat, herbsofmayat.com, if you need any herbal teas, herbal blends. You can even get some drip Mayat Sons gear on MoorishHaberdasher.com with so much other regalia. And again, I thank you all for tapping in. I'm Noble Moso L. Gratitude for all who jumping on. It's my solar return. Gratitude for all the well wishes from all the nobles in the tribe and family. Continue to be light, love, peace, truth, freedom, and justice. And with that, I hope all the nobles and empresses enjoy their night. If you want any books, please reach out, email me, or look for me on Instagram, Mayat Sons, MAATSUNZ.
I'm a spirit speaking, truth seeking, heart reaching, knowledge leaking, seeds sowing, harvest reaping, man of neither me. I have yet to leave, I'm still breathing. To quit, I have no reason. I mean, I'm asleep, but I be trying to live my dream. I cannot even act if it's all easy. Either you gon' do it or you don't really. It ain't no in between. Baby, you can ask the sun, it's an everyday theme. Consistency in your routine is how you bring reality.